Alright guys, welcome back to the video. So in this one we're going to be building an end grain chessboard. Now I'm not an avid chess player, nor do I really need this as a display piece in my house because I don't generally have guests over. But I decided I wanted to do this project because it seems just like something cool to do. So you haven't picked up on it yet, the materials we're going to be using for the chessboard are white oak and walnut. This is by far my favorite combinations of wood that's out there. The two woods complement each other so well, and it's overall a much darker tone compared to, your walnut and maple combination. Now, I don't have a lot of experience making end grain boards, but it is a fairly simple process as long as you follow a few steps, the most important of which is doing really good glue ups. Every time you do a glue up for an end grain board, you need to make sure you've cleaned up the surface as best as you can and be working with perfectly flat pieces each time. So in the beginning here, I'm taking a lot of time to joint the edges nice and square, then I'll clean them up on the table saw, and then any areas that are still not perfect, I'll go back in with my low angle jack and just get everything to fit up perfectly. The other important factor of making an end grain board is having good organization. You want to make sure you're paying attention to the layout of your end grain because every piece of wood is going to have a different pattern to it. So it's just important right at the beginning to look at each piece of end grain and just judge which ones are going to go together well, which ones aren't, and label them right off the get-go. Now you'll notice that I'm pretty heavily coating these pieces of wood with this Type on 3, and I want them to be as saturated as absolutely possible and every square inch of these boards to be completely coated. This is going to be extremely important when we actually start making our end grain board. We want as much glue connection as we possibly can have, so you can't have even a small area that doesn't have some glue connecting it to the other pieces. So with this new blank all cleaned up, we can start cutting it into smaller sections to make up our next glue up. Unlike most of the glue ups I do, this one needs to come out perfectly on the first try. So if any of your seams come out of alignment on this board, it's going to look kind of weird in the finished chessboard. So what I'm going to be doing here is just drilling a whole bunch of dowel holes, and this is what's going to create our alignment. Now I'm creating this jig here, but if you have a fence for your drill press or anything like that, you can definitely do this a lot easier and a lot faster, but this was just a method that I found worked for me. So this allowed me to drill my holes in the exact same position each time, and in total I put 4 holes in each piece. So this gave me plenty of option for putting in dowels and created a perfect alignment in the glue up. After our second glue up, we now need to get this new board fully flattened up. Now, absolutely, if you're ever going to do an end grain board, do not ever put one of these through your planer. It could quite literally explode on you and destroy your planer as well as create a ton of shrapnel. So the two best ways are either using the router flattening jig like you just saw, or to use a drum sander. Either one of these is going to work just great to give you a nice, perfectly flat surface. Now, it is important to note that if you're using a drum sander, you're going to get a ton of burning, so there will be a whole bunch of sanding afterwards, but it does work decently well to give you a nice flat surface. Of course, no chessboard is complete without some kind of frame going around it, because it's nice and all to just have the big, basically end grain butcher block sitting there, but having the frame around it really just makes it a beautiful showpiece. So we're just using some 8-quarter walnut that I had left over from the king bed frame that I built a while back, and so because we're going through all the effort of making this chessboard out of end grain, we want to make sure this frame is up to the same standard. It needs to be something that looks beautiful. So we're going to be using some through bridle joints, adding some small details here and there, and overall just creating something that is very subtly beautiful. And we don't want it to take away from the chessboard itself, but we still want the frame to be equally beautiful as the chessboard. To cut our bridle joints, I started by trying to use the table saw. Now, this worked for the most part. The only issue is these tenoning jigs. Depends on the one you buy, but some of them are really good, some of them really suck. For the most part, this jig is really good, except for that handle that I used to tighten the pieces on there. It broke while I was doing this, so I wasn't able to hold things nicely in place. But, for the most part, if you have a tenoning jig, you use it every once in a while, but they're definitely not something that I would recommend buying. The much simpler solution to this would be to just build a jig that rides on your table saw fence, and that would probably work out a lot better in the long run. And since I ended up breaking that jig, I decided to just finish off the bridle joints by hand. So by using my moxing vise here, I can just very easily go in and clear out the excess material that I wasn't able to clean up in the table saw. Then it was just a matter of cleaning up the waste with some chisels, and this gave me an absolutely perfect bridle joint on all 4 corners. For some bonus detail, we're going to be incorporating a step design into the frame too. So 2 of our pieces are going to be just slightly higher, and then our outer 2 pieces are going to sit just below. Now the depth difference here is not massive, and that's exactly what I was aiming for. The other nice thing about having the different depths is that it very clearly defines which is the front and the back and sides of the chessboard. So you can very easily tell that when you look at the chessboard, whether you're sitting at the front or the back of it. That'll also get helped out later on when we add some handles into our frames. But I decided to just do all of this with the hand plane because that is honestly the most easy and accurate way to do it. Trying to go through the drum stand or planer, you run the risk of taking off too much material, whereas with the hand plane, it's super easy to just sneak up on the perfect sizing. Then the final detail I decided to add to the frame was some stippling along the side edges. Now, stippling is basically a technique where you take a gouge, or in this case a burr and a Dremel, and just make a whole bunch of small cuts all over the place. And the idea here is that this just creates a kind of a bumpy texture that really catches the light from all different angles and just creates some visual interest. I found that when I was looking at the side of this board, the sides of the frame looked just very boring. It was very flat and not super appealing, whereas just by going in and adding this little bit of texture, it made the whole board just look a lot better. Then of course, to finish off the board, we're going to use some tried and true varnish oil. Now this will give the board a nice satin sheen, so it's not matte, but it has a nice, it catches the light really nicely, which worked great with all of the stippling detail along the edges. But that is going to do it for this board, guys. There's some glory shots coming up in just a moment here, but as always, I do hope you enjoyed this project, and I will see you in the next one.